Hi guys, and welcome to certainly one of my more ambitious projects. Originally this video was just going to be an updated Halloween rankings. Somebody requested it last week, I think. I agreed to that at the time, but at the last minute I thought to myself, well, given that I've already done a Halloween rankings twice in recent years, why not do something different here? Why not go bigger and bolder? Why not do a rankings which incorporates the 5 classic slasher franchises from that began in the 80s, early 90s, you know. So today we have got Jason, we've got Freddy, we've got Chucky, we've got Leatherface, and we've got Michael, arguably the greatest 5 iconic slasher killers of all time, going head to head in the same ranking. And best part is there are exactly 50 films, which is a great rounded number. It won't stay that for very long. I'm sure there will be a new film for one of these franchises either next year or the year after. So this is a great opportunity, I think, to do this right now when there are exactly 50 films, and I've been really looking forward to getting into it. I'm going to split this into 2 videos, otherwise it'd be extremely long. So today I'm going to do 50 to 26, and my next video after this will be 25 to 1. And I guess the last thing to say is that, yes, there's going to be a bit of bias today. I don't love all of these franchises equally, and these are just my opinions. I'm just one man. I'm a one-man band. I'm not a group of people all feeding in a number of scores and then the average score is taken. No, it's literally just one guy's opinion. So you're going to see some really random stuff in this ranking. You know, films that you thought were popular down sort of near the bottom, and other films near the top that normally are not that well appreciated by fans of these franchises. I do have some weird opinions and I do not apologise for them. Right, enough preamble, let's get into it. And with the film at number 50, already I am going to be pissing people off. So let's find out what it is. A couple of years ago, I did a full run through of the Nightmare on Elm Street films. But by the time I got to this one, I was seriously waning. This is the last film that I needed straight after Freddy's dead. I think I needed the franchise to produce something dark and serious after Freddy's dead to sort of repair some of the damage from that film. But what we get instead with this is a weird kind of one-shot meta experience that, even though I understood it, even though I know what's going on with this in terms of the story and everything, I just found it an absolute bore. Seeing Heather Langenkamp playing herself, an actress I never really liked anyway. I was sort of enjoying this for like 20 minutes, and then for the remaining part of the runtime, I was half asleep. And this is a long film. It's like an hour 52. If you're not into this, it's a real drag. What doesn't help matters is the fact that, for whatever reason, Wes Craven only uses actors from the first movie, which I find a bit of a self-indulgent thing on his part. I mean, there are a number of classic characters in this franchise from all through the films, 1 to 6. He could have used all of them and made this a real bonanza of a film, but he doesn't do that for whatever reason. Was it a financial reason, maybe? Could he not afford to bring too many actors into the fray? I don't know, but this film doesn't even have any interesting kills. I think this is the one with the irritating scene where there's like a kid running across a freeway and the cars are just missing him, and Freddy's kind of like in the sky like a puppeteer going like he's Krusty the Clown or something. That's not tension for me. That's just extremely irritating and bewildering that they would do that. And yet this film, I know it has its fans, but it is really not for me. I just could not stand it. So this is the only Child's Play film that doesn't have Brad Dourif's Chucky. And once I realised what the gist was of this, once I realised that all we were getting was an AI Chucky doll that has nothing to do with the original character, no resemblance hardly, I really struggled with that, you know. It would have been different if this had still taken place in the same universe as the original run of films. Say, if Dourif's Chucky had been in this and there had been like a batch of AI Chucky dolls to come into the mix, so you would have like secondary villains in that sense. But because this is a separate universe altogether where Dourif's Chucky literally doesn't exist, then I kind of feel like the movie is entirely pointless. It shouldn't really have the Child's Play trademark on it. I don't mind Roy Burns being or pretending to be Jason Voorhees because it's still the same universe as the rest of those films. You know, it makes sense for the story of that area that a copycat killer would come along. But if Roy Burns was wearing the Jason mask in a completely separate universe, then in that sense, it would make no sense it being the same run of films, if you see what I mean. I've kind of made that a bit hard to follow, but I think you get the point. But even if you judge this film just as a standalone one-off film about an AI doll, it's still not very good, in all honesty. There's a good kill with a lawnmower, and the rest of it is extremely mediocre. So at this point, Jason loses his first film and Freddy loses his second. I really don't like this film, though. The first hour's pretty good. Catherine Isabel is an absolute delight, and there are some good kill scenes at a cornfield and the house where the first kill takes place. But the problems come once Freddy and Jason have to square off against each other. I've just got no interest in watching some hypothetical dream killer fighting a zombie man. It's just silly. I might as well be watching Mega Shark against Giant Octopus. This film would have been better if Freddy and Jason had just not fought, maybe just worked together right until the end of the film, or just stayed separate. I don't know. 'Cause the story for this is pretty good up until the point where the two main villains come together. The stuff about the clinic for people who have encountered Freddy before and all that stuff. But yeah, I just don't want to see these two fight. It's just lame. And also, director Ronnie Yu commits two cardinal sins with this. Firstly, he doesn't bring Kane Hodder on board, which I just find absolutely ridiculous. Apparently because he's not tall enough, but you look at stills for this film and Freddy's sort of hunched over, and you know that Kane Hodder would still be towering over him, so it just doesn't make any sense to me. And also, what is this stuff about Jason being afraid of water all of a sudden? What are you doing? Have you even watched any of the other movies? So yeah, it's an offensive film, in all honesty. The first hour, like I said, is watchable, but I've no desire to ever go back to this. So Leatherface loses his first film at this point. I've only got two positive things to say about this film. Firstly, there are some nice looking desert scenes near the beginning, and I guess Ken Foray is mildly entertaining at times, but when I think of this film, all that comes to my mind is trees in the dark and Leatherface is running around somewhere, and there's a house scene at some point where all the villains start cackling amongst each other, and I think somebody gives Leatherface a gold chainsaw, and it's just all really boring. There's no creativity going on. This is one of the most generic A to B slasher films I've ever seen. There's just nothing to it. It's a TV film in essence. This film is indicative of the absolute hole that this franchise fell into for a while after the original film. It's pretty terrible, to be honest. The main girl, the main actress slash character, one of the most forgettable women who has ever tried to lead a horror film. I've seen this twice and I can't even remember what this woman looks like or anything she says. It's just a bad movie, period. We've now gone two spots in the rankings without a Freddy film appearing. What mystical skullduggery is this, you ask? Well, I present to you the enigma that is Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Next Generation, a film I actually rented out for me and my student housemates back in the day. The idea was that the person who got to pick the movie was the person who paid for it at the video store, so I took on this burden, this responsibility this one time. I thought I was being really edgy and brave with my choice, choosing a film with a title like this, because I'd not even seen a Texas Chainsaw film at the time, I think, but it was a bad mistake going for this. By the halfway point of this film, nobody in the room was still watching it. We were all kind of like just talking between ourselves with our bottles of beer as the film carried on spinning its VHS wheels in the background. Every now and again, I would look up at the TV and see a guy with a metal leg berating somebody, but I'm not even sure we still had it on by the end credits, to be honest. Years later, I did revisit the film, obviously, just to see if we were all idiots by not watching it properly. Not the case. The film is extremely bad. It introduces a brand new family for Leatherface, as a lot of these films do, and then refuses to kill off most of those family members, sort of thinking that there's going to be 5 or 6 sequels, which obviously never happens with this franchise. It's really irritating when they do that, because the guys in this film, and there's a woman estate agent character as well, they're so annoying. I just want them offed by the end of the movie, and for the most part, they're not killed. It's frustrating. There are some good things about this which just put it slightly above Texas Chainsaw 3. So I really like the performance of Renee Zellweger. People bang on about Matthew McConaughey, but I think Zellweger really puts her back into this performance. She really goes for it. I like the drag look of Leatherface as well. It sort of ties in a little bit to my perceptions of the character from the original film, even though you don't see him in drag in that original. And the last 5 minutes where there's a plane and a camper van and it all gets a bit Benny Hill, I think that's a good way to end the movie, I suppose. But these good things about it, it's not enough to make up for just how boring it is. Honestly, sitting through this film is a real chore, and it's certainly not one that I want to see again. I really like the Freddy films up until the end of number 4, and then you get a kind of tipping point after that where they just completely lose the plot with these movies, and it starts here with number 5 and it just never recovers afterwards. I don't know what's going on with the plot in this one, something to do with a child. It's really confusing. The mythology at this point is tripping over itself, trying to come up with new angles, new reasons for Freddy to come back and keep going. I'm glad that Alice comes back because she's a character I really liked from number 4, but the kills are just cartoony and silly in this one. The one with the artist who ends up in his own drawing and the girl who ends up eating herself to death. And from what I can recall, when I did a full-length review for this film, I just ripped it to shreds. I think I gave it like 1 out of 5. This really is the point where it all started to go wrong for this franchise, unfortunately. So here we have another Jason film. You may have noticed that we've not yet had a Halloween film. It's coming soon, believe me, but for now we're back on Friday the 13th. Now this film has a lot of fans. I think this one has really gained in popularity over the years, I'd say, but I'm not one of its fans. I've watched it 4 or 5 times since it came out. I've tried really hard to get into this film, and I just can't do it, honestly. The first 20 minutes are great. It's like some really high-budget fan film. But once you get past that, there's only like an hour of the film left at that point, and we just don't really have enough time to get used or to get to know the second bunch of characters that come along. They're just not a very well-written bunch, I think. I'm not just talking about Trent, the really irritating one. It's all the characters, really. The geeks who spend all their time perving on that blonde. The blonde herself, nice to look at, but there's no character there. There's only really Jared Padalecki and Danielle Panabaker who have interesting characters. The rest of them, there's just nothing there. A lot of the earlier Friday characters from the classic 80s movies, even though you never got to find out that much about them, there was always a certain charm about them. I don't think you get that with this group of people at all. The whole Jason kidnapping people and putting them underground thing as well, that's just not a good move for me. And there's a certain twist that happens towards the end of the end of this. I didn't approve of that either. I just really lose interest in this film once we get down the home stretch. I'm not enjoying the characters. I'm not enjoying the vibe that this film's going for. The Jason that we get is all right, I suppose, but ultimately it's not a Friday film that I particularly like. And this is coming from somebody who is a massive Friday the 13th fan overall. This is one of the worst sequels I've ever seen compared to how good its predecessor was. And the only other example I can give you of this is how bad Battle Royale 2 was compared to Battle Royale 1. I really don't like what Tobe Hooper did with this, turning the whole thing into a black comedy. This is meant to be sort of funny and horrific, but it doesn't really succeed in either one of those goals. Like, there's only one part of this film that I find funny, and that's when Dennis Hopper goes into the chainsaw shop and he's looking around for different chainsaws. That's funny, but apart from that, there's nothing else that I laugh at in this. There's one good scene of what you would call horror when Caroline Williams spots that Leatherface is wearing the dead skin of her colleague from back at the radio station. That's a well-written scene, but these are just bits and pieces within a 90-minute runtime. Most of this I just don't find enjoyable. In fact, the whole experience is painful because I'm sat watching this thinking about what they could have done with a sequel to one of the greatest films ever made, you know? I really don't like it. Rob Zombie had the right idea, because I think The Devil's Rejects is what this film could have been if it had been done properly. So sad when I think of Texas Chainsaw 2. And I can't stand that character who is like the replacement for the hitchhiker from the first film. Honestly, by the time I'm done watching this film, I just want to get a rocket launcher, aim it at that guy's face, and blow it up. His character, it really gnaws on me by the end of this film. My God, do I want him to just shut his mouth. My beef with this one is virtually identical to that I have with Texas Chainsaw 2. So what we've got here is a film which is trying to be sort of half comedy, half horror, but for me it doesn't really succeed in either of those. The film hedges its bets too much. There is an entertaining section in the middle, just when Chucky and the bride get going on their road trip. We get a montage and some kills and some laughs, and it's quite good for 20-30 minutes. But at the start of the film, I mean, the story takes forever to get going, and I can't even remember what happens in the finale of this, just that it's really, really bland. This is the only film in this franchise that I own on Blu-ray. Such was the reputation of the film. I didn't even rent this one. I just went straight out and bought a Blu-ray. Big mistake. I don't have a problem with Jennifer Tilly as the bride coming into the series at this point. I think that's quite an interesting turn of events. It's interesting for the Chucky character to have to deal with that. I just don't think this film is written that well. I just don't think there's enough good content in it for it to have the reputation that it does, though obviously I'm just one person at the end of the day. There's a kill in this film that doesn't even make sense for me. So in the hotel, when the shards of glass come down from the ceiling and impale the couple, I just don't think that would actually kill them. It's not like the glass is being fired down out of a gun, it's just falling, and I think for the most part you would just get a few cuts and bruises. Maybe if you were unlucky, one or two of the shards would stab you in a bad way, but I don't think you'd be killed in that situation. If it was me, for an experiment, lying down on that bed, and I was at least allowed to lie face down, I wouldn't expect to die. I mean, I'd be scared, but I think the most I would expect to get out of that is a few minor injuries, a few really bad cuts, but I'd certainly expect to live through the experience. So finally we have a Halloween film. This one was quite enjoyable when it came out. It was new Halloween content, you know, and Jamie Lee was back, but with every subsequent viewing over the years, I've just enjoyed it less and less. Plus, I'm one of those people who has a certain kind of, shall we say, franchise OCD. If I'm doing a full run through of the franchise, then I literally have to watch every film, including the bad ones. But this film, I mean, the characters in it are just absolutely paper thin, with the exception of Jamie Lee, who they've probably overwritten. It's like they spent all this time developing the Laurie character in this and just completely forgotten about everybody else. But that's not to say that I like what they've done with Laurie in this. I just don't like how she's apparently recovered her life enough to get a teaching job, have a marriage, and then regressed and gone back to being an alcoholic. It's never quite chimed with me, her journey between 78 and 98 as depicted here, and it would be even worse, I guess, in the 2018 version, 2018 timeline. As for the actual kills and the excitement in this, there's not a whole lot of it. They've tried to sort of copy the blueprint of the original Carpenter film, but without Carpenter's skill. I don't mind the California setting, I suppose, but I don't understand why the entire film inside this college or school or whatever is set at the front gate or in the boiler room. It's like, where's the rest of the school? Where's the rest of the campus? It's like there's no production scale to this project at all. It's like Jamie Lee took half the money and then they suddenly realised that, oh shit, we actually need some money for a film and we don't have that much of it now that we've paid her, and we end up with this. The film does have a good reputation, just like Bride of Chucky before it, in this ranking, but for me, it's definitely the worst Halloween film. For me, this is the worst of the first four Freddy films. I think you have to go to part five to find one that's worse than this. If you watch this film as a straight up Freddy film where everything is being taken at face value, then the film doesn't even make that much sense, because the lore of what Freddy can and can't do is kind of messed around with in this film compared to what was set up in the first film. It's a little bit odd at times. But if you watch this film a different way, if you watch it as a kind of drama about a teenage boy struggling to come to terms with his sexuality, and Freddy comes along and plays on that a little bit, plays on the boy's turmoil, you know, the adolescence he's going through and all that stuff, then it becomes a far more in-depth, interesting film, I think. This could have been like the Halloween ends of the Freddy franchise, with Freddy kind of getting somebody who's pure and turning them into a killer. But it's kind of left for you to interpret it as you will, I guess, by the end of this. You know, you can look at it, you know, straight as a straight up Freddy film if you can work through the problems with the established mythology, or you can look at it as a more in-depth film. I think it's better if you do go down the gay route with it, if you do look at it as a film where this boy is struggling with his sexuality. But just taking it as a horror film, I don't actually find it that exciting. I think it's quite a chore to get through for the most part. I've got respect for it, but it's certainly not one of my favourite efforts. As you can probably tell by now, Nightmare on Elm Street is certainly my least favourite of these franchises. That being said, the remake version from 2010, I think, fares better than some of the other remakes in this list. So I would put this ahead of the Friday the 13th 2009 film, and I would certainly put this ahead of the Child's Play remake. I like the fact that we've gone back to darker Freddy here. That was definitely a good move after the missteps in Part 5 and Part 6. The trouble is, this is a very generic horror film on the whole. It's like it was written in a boardroom by people in suits just ticking boxes. That there's no creative spark in this film. There's no moments that would make me think, oh, that was a really good idea. You know, it's just the most formulaic, by the numbers Nightmare on Elm Street film you can think of. You can tell that they just wanted to get a film out there, you know, no frills, no spills. It's a Nightmare on Elm Street film. You won't have nightmares, but you're getting a Nightmare on Elm Street film, you know. I've heard it said that the main actress in this, it looks really disinterested, Rooney Mara. Not sure I'd entirely agree with that. I mean, I don't. She's average, certainly. She's no better than average in this film. I wouldn't say that she's bad, but she's certainly on the side of uninspiring, shall we say. But it's an all right film. It's not one that I would be in a rush to go back to, but it doesn't do anything to get my back up. One of the most trashed films of all time, although I didn't think it was that bad. So, to let you know some of the things I didn't like about this, the video game kill is awful. As somebody who is old enough to have played games from that era, I can tell you that what they've done with video games in this film is just, it's offensive. It's like you can tell whoever wrote that scene, that sequence, had never played a game in their life. Also, this script is really frustrating at times. Like, I felt watching this, like I was being entertained 1 minute and then just appalled the next minute. Then next minute I'm quite entertained, and then, oh God, just stop with those shouty, annoying characters. And then the next minute, something reasonably good's happening. It's a really inconsistent film. It definitely needed some more rewrites, but there is some good stuff in it. The guy who suffers from vertigo and he's constantly falling, that's genuinely scary to me because I really don't like heights. So all that stuff absolutely works for me personally. And I think the hearing kill is pretty decent as well. And all the stuff with the mythology that they shoehorn into this, I didn't feel was that bad. Stuff with Freddy's daughter and the inner Freddy demon things with the bad CGI, I thought that was quite good. So on the whole, yeah, not the worst Freddy film by any stretch. It's certainly one with a myriad of problems, but I don't think it's quite deserving of the bad reputation that it has. This is probably the only time in this franchise that we've had some continuity from one film to the next. Sadly, though, it was in the form of a prequel and not a sequel, and that definitely took a lot of the tension out of the story for me because, let's face it, I knew exactly who had to survive this film. I knew who had to die, and I couldn't quite get into the film as a result. I felt like I was treading water throughout most of it. My interest just wasn't quite there. Now, in the subsequent year or two since I watched it, I have come up with this idea whereby, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to re-watch the remake and this film, the beginning, but next time I'm going to do it the other way around so that I watch the beginning first and then maybe I watch the remake straight after it, maybe even on the same night, and just consider it one big long 3-hour epic horror film. I think if I do that, I will enjoy the beginning a lot more, and doing it that way, I'll get to finish off with that annoying cop being killed at the end of the 3 hours. But as it is right now, I have yet to embark on that experiment. So doing this ranking today, the beginning is sadly a film which has finished in the lower reaches of the rankings. So I'd heard that this was like the Freddy's Dead of the Chucky franchise, i.e. a film that you just shouldn't bother with, a film that's completely and utterly terrible in every respect. But to my surprise, I actually found it quite entertaining to watch. What the film does right is that it focuses completely on the comedy and pretty much sticks to that. Whereas Bride of Chucky tried to be all things to all people. It tried to do a bit of comedy, a bit of horror, and it just ended up fudging each and everything that it tried to do. But Seed of Chucky is mostly trying to be a comedy horror film, and it's actually quite funny for the most part, or at least I found it to be quite funny. Strangely though, even though it's focusing on the comedy, it still manages to throw in quite a lot of gory deaths, which I thought were really cool. Somehow this film still has more good kills, more good gore than Bride of Chucky, which makes absolutely no sense. But I certainly enjoyed this film more out of the two. Having said that, I certainly wouldn't want to see a Seed of Chucky 2. This was fine as a one-off change of pace in the middle of the franchise, but by the time I got to the end of it, I'd certainly had enough. You know, once I got onto Curse of Chucky, I was absolutely ready for the type of film that Curse of Chucky is. I didn't want to see a repeat of Seed of Chucky, but the one time that I watched this, genuinely, I quite enjoyed it. I laughed quite a few times. I even laughed at the Britney Spears joke, even though it's absolute shit. But the film had me in the right mood by the time that joke came along, and same with all the other jokes that it throws at you. Maybe it would be different if I wasn't... maybe it would be different if I was a massive Chucky fan, you know, i.e. I would have more on the line. Because when I think of my favourite franchise, the Halloween franchise, how would I react if they made a Seed of Halloween film and they were throwing jokes left, right and centre? I'd probably hate it, I'll be honest. But as somebody who can look at this film as a neutral, shall we say, yeah, good time. Speaking of Halloween, this one really makes me gnash my teeth. They just completely blow it in terms of how they bring the story forwards from part 4. They had this great setup with Jamie potentially going to be a killer, and they just retcon the whole thing and have her go back to being a normal kid. What they should have done is take a more Halloween Ends approach, you know, have Michael and Jamie Lee both be killers operating in town at the same time, but they just blow it. They completely bottle this setup, absolutely. And the film that we get instead is just one of your most generic slasher films that you could possibly get, except it's not as good as part 4. A lot of the characters are badly treated in this. Loomis is terrible, easily the worst Loomis in the entire franchise. He's just angry the whole film. Mika, that character's completely destroyed. I don't mind Tina, funnily enough. She's not brilliant, but she's all right. I think I've seen the film that many times now that I've actually started to like the whole but-ba-da, but-ba-da, and all her wackiness. It's like if you lived with a really stupidly crazy aunt for like 20 years, eventually you'd start to come around to their silly, over-the-top ways, and I'm kind of at that point now with Tina. I don't mind her. There's a really good sequence in this film with a barn. That's another reason why this film just nudges ahead of Halloween H2O for me, but the overall film is a little bit of a slog, and it's certainly one of the worst Halloween films. Although I do like the Fonz character in the leather jacket. He's quite entertaining. As short-lived as his time in this film is, he does put a smile on my face. The Friday the 13th film that doesn't have any gore in it, if this film came out today, it might actually be a 12. It might be a PG. I mean, there's just no violence in it. Everything's a quick cutaway just when you're about to get to the meaty part of the kill. It's frustrating to watch. It's like if you go to McDonald's and buy a big cheeseburger, but the actual burger has been taken out before they give it to you. So all you're left with are the 2 baps. And then you're eating the baps and you're thinking to yourself, well, it's not bad as bap goes, but it's a little stale. It's missing a little meat in the middle, you know. I think that's a reasonable analogy, but the film wouldn't be a good film with the gore in. Don't get me wrong. There's all sorts of problems with this. I've never liked the whole Carrie versus Jason idea. I like my final girls to just be normal people who fight back with their ingenuity and they find their inner strength. You know, I don't want to see people acting like Supergirl going, tree, fall down, block Jason. Tree, telegraph pole, fall down and block Jason, or electrocute him or something like that. It's just too easy, you know. It's kind of like Jason almost becomes the underdog, and it's just not exciting for me. And the characters in this film are just really thin. Like, you hardly get to know any of them. I actually struggle to keep up with who's who in this film, especially when it comes to the blondes. There are a number of blonde women in this film who just all look the same. Other Friday the 13th films do a much better job of making me remember the characters somehow, and I can't stand the Doctor character in this. He's extremely irritating. I don't know what's going on with the ending as well. The guy who randomly jumps out of the water when he's supposed to be dead. It's a film full of problems. For me, it is very much the end of the golden generation of Friday the 13th films in the 80s. Having said that, there is at least one film that came out after Part 7 that I absolutely love, and we're not going to be seeing that on the rankings for some time to come. When it comes to horror films in space, this is basically the complete opposite to Ridley Scott's Alien, i.e. everything is brightly lit in this film. There's no slow build-up in tension. None of the characters are well developed. It's just stupid, over-the-top, campy slasher action that is not based in any kind of serious reality. I watched this film as part of a watch party once and actually had a good time, but that's how the film is meant to be watched, i.e. with other people, having a beer, having some pizza maybe, you know, having a good chuckle at the film at the same time you're watching it. If you watch this film on your own, I think you're less likely to have a good time. It's a party film, you know, but there's so many problems with this. The heroine just loses all relevance about halfway through the movie, and the kick-ass female android that's meant to be like a teenage boy's wet dream that never did anything for me. There is that famous kill with the head smash, the blonde scientist. You know, there's one or two other spicy moments that are actually quite good to watch. It's not completely terrible, but it certainly could have ended up a lot better than this. And it's, the more I watch it over the years, it goes down for me a little bit every time. This one's got a really nice aesthetic to it with the whiteness of the clinic where most of the story takes place. Plus, I think there's snow outside, although it's been a while since I saw it. But this story is quite, I wouldn't say captivating is the word, but it's certainly engaging. It kept me interested. There are a few twists here and there, and you get certain characters turning up that maybe you didn't think were going to turn up. And I like the whole multiple Chucky thing. I know not all fans of the series liked that, but I thought it was kind of cool. And there are some reasonable characters in here, reasonable kills, and certainly by the end of the film, I could have taken some more of this timeline, you know. So I think that after this one, that's when you have to then watch the TV show to carry on with the Brad Dourif timeline. Now, I've not seen any of the TV show yet. It's not popped up on any of the streaming services that I've got, but certainly at some point I will get on it. I'm already 2 seasons behind. The only thing that Cult of Chucky does, which I definitely do not like, is it repeats that falling glass shard thing again from Bride of Chucky. Stop doing that. So I've got Cult and Curse side by side in this ranking, although I would certainly give the nod to Curse as being the marginally better film. This was really good to see after the comedic seed of Chucky. They go back to a more serious slasher film with this one. We've got Chucky sporting a very good look, I must say, in a house with a family. It's a very contained film in terms of its location, but that works for it quite well, given that there probably wasn't a massive budget. But I think the family is written quite well in this film. Brad Dourif's daughter, who comes in to play either the lead role or one of the lead roles, she's actually really good. It's not just a case of her being shoehorned in there, you know, as a favour to Brad. She actually seems like a pretty decent actress from what I can garner watching this film. And just when you think this film's over, we get a curious sort of last 10-15 minutes where you get flashbacks and twists and new things happening that you might not have expected given the film we'd been watching up to that point. There's a bit of setup for the potential for more movies or whatever. So on the whole, a film that I definitely like. And at this stage of the ranking, I'd say that we're definitely heading into all the films that have a lot of merit about them. First of all, I love Roy Burns as a concept. It absolutely makes sense to me that after a certain amount of years of Jason doing the killing, some nut job would come along and try and hide their own misdeeds behind the Jason legend. I'm not one of those people who says, well, if it doesn't have Jason Voorhees in it, it's not a Friday the 13th movie, is it? Where this film falls down a little bit is in the characterization. This halfway house place that's used for this movie, I like the fact that they're using somewhere that's not on the lake for a change, but we just don't get to know these characters enough. We don't spend enough time at the main building in the film. That there's too much wasted runtime focusing on people being killed elsewhere, just random characters, cocaine snorters and kids who've broken down on the highway. That time should have been spent more on, allowing us to get to know the kids at the halfway house. This movie could have had a kind of Dream Warriors feel, but you just don't get that at all. And after you've watched the film like several times, it really dawns on you just how little character development there is. This director, he really was just focused on the excesses of this, boobs and kills. And what you get of both of those is generally very good, to be fair, but the film just had the potential to be one of the great Friday the 13th movies against all the odds, and I think ultimately it just kind of falls a little bit short of that and is more a kind of halfway down the rankings kind of film. But I still like it. I still like the idea of it, but yeah, it could have been so much more. This is the final evidence, I guess, that I'm not the world's biggest Child's Play fan. I mean, I respect these movies and I can enjoy them, but I certainly don't love them, and I've no intention of adding them to my collection anytime soon. I've got Bride of Chucky, and I don't need any more than that, honestly. But this first film, it's definitely a classic. It's Child's Play in its rawest form, watching this young boy befriend this doll, and you get that long, slow build-up until Chucky actually says anything, and then once he does, as a viewer, you just desperately want Chucky to be on the screen more and more after that, so you can hear more of his wisecracks. There's a good story in this film. I'm not massively convinced about the casting of the mother. Somebody, Hicks is her name. I'm pretty sure I've seen this actress in other films and she's really good. I'm just not sure she's suited to this type of movie, but the kid does a great job, and I love the way that Chucky keeps coming back at the end of the film, a bit like the Terminator. It's good. It's a good, solid opener to this franchise. If you followed the channel for any length of time before today, you may have already learned that I am one of the world's big defenders of Halloween Resurrection. I really like this film. Really, I do. The only thing I don't like about it is the prologue with Laurie. I think it's sloppily written. It's not that I mind seeing her killed. I just don't like the manner of it. I don't like the way she kisses the mask. I don't like how she's so easily tricked. I think what would have been better, if they'd have had Jamie Lee for longer, would have been for the story to keep going back to the asylum periodically throughout the movie. Maybe Laurie could have been watching the stuff at the Myers house through the internet, possibly getting more and more worried, seeing Myers back in action. And then at the end of the film, Myers would then go and see Laurie, and you'd have the big final confrontation at the asylum. But as it is, I don't much care for it. Once we get past the asylum stuff, though, everything that happens with Dangertainment, I absolutely love. I just find it really funny and entertaining. All the characters who go into this house, they're just really funny to me. I much prefer them to the boring kids from Halloween H2O, and the blonde in this, I forget her name, absolutely hilarious. And I really like the two kids who are watching it all from across the street, the two kids who are dressed up like characters from Pulp Fiction. They're like two characters from American Pie. I just find their chemistry together absolutely hilarious. This is the 8th film in the franchise. I don't mind something slightly lighter at this point, and that's what you get with this, but I just have a great time with it, honestly. I don't even mind Buster. Yes, he's a little bit annoying in the last 5 minutes when he's F-bombing. For some reason, he just becomes unbearable in the last 5 minutes, but up until then, I don't mind him. I think he's very charismatic. So on the whole, I'm definitely a fan of this movie. It gets way too much hate for me, and I consider myself a fan of it, definitely. So all of a sudden we've got a little flurry of Halloween movies. This one is very much a tale of two halves for me. I love the first hour, all the stuff with the firemen and the 78 flashbacks. I even like the penguin type guy running around trying to escape from the mob at the hospital. I know some people don't like that, but I did. Where the film shits the bed, though, is the last 20, 30 minutes. It doesn't end well, this film. The death of Karen is really telegraphed. I mean, everybody predicted this death, but it's like the film thinks that this is some big surprise, some big emotional moment, but like literally everybody was predicting her death, so it just doesn't really hit the spot at all. And the fight between Myers and the townspeople, it's just not filmed very well. It's like they had no budget to spend time on this scene and choreograph it properly and make it awesome. You know, this could have been like the Halloween version of Kill Bill or something. It could have been really great, but as it is, it's just skimped over. It's poor. And there's no confrontation between Tommy and Myers. You know, the whole movie we've been thinking, oh wow, this guy with the baseball bat, and going up against Myers later on, this is going to be something. And there's just nothing to watch. It's really disappointing. I also don't like what they did with the Cameron character in this film, redeeming him so that he sort of dies a hero. I just think that's a little bit lazy and boring. I mean, he was perfectly set up after the first film to maybe be like a secondary villain, be a real arsehole in this film, get in everybody's way and just be a complete dick. But they go for something far more boring, just, you know, making him apologetic for what he did at the party in the first film, stuff like that. So even though there's a lot of content in this film that I really like, it's sadly let down by tons of other things that I do not like. And so therefore, what I thought at first was going to be one of the great Halloween films has sadly turned into one of the more middle of the road sort of ones. So we finish off today with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake, a film which many people actually think is better than the original. I'm not one of those people. In fact, the first time I watched this, I was a little bit underwhelmed by it. I think I gave it like 2.5 out of 5 when I did my review on this channel. But second time around, I liked it a lot more, I think. It's definitely a film that's growing on me over time. It's certainly a cut above all those crappy Texas Chainsaw sequels that came out between the original and this one. The film's biggest trump card is definitely the lead actress, Jessica Biel. She's absolutely incredible, and the final chase between her and Leatherface is one of the highlights of this franchise. When she pops out of the locker and cuts his arm off, it's such an unexpected moment, but it's brilliant. And then she runs that cop over with her car. The final chase in this is just absolutely amazing. The film does fall down a little bit earlier on than that in the middle section, I'd say. Most of the other characters, apart from Jessica Biel's, they die very, very easily and usually in very pathetic ways. I don't like the cop, the chatty, witty cop that you get in this. I know a lot of people aren't a fan of that character, but for me, he's just annoying. I really don't like him. I'm not generally a fan of witty, chatty horror villains, you know. Your Chuckies, your Freddys, they're not usually my favourite types of slasher villain. I'm much more a fan of the silent, moodier ones like Leatherface and Michael. That's just my preference. So this cop, he really gets on my nerves after a while. But this film has a great look to it. I mean, aesthetically, it's very pleasing on the eye all the way through the movie, and certainly it's one that it's a film in this franchise that I'll definitely go back to. And I can't say the same for every film in this series. Right, we'll leave it there for today. I have gone from 50 to 26. I will be back very, very soon for part 2, where I will go from 25 to number 1, and we'll finish this thing off. That will be my next video. I'm not going to have a break and do reviews and stuff. My very next video after this one will be part 2, and hopefully it will be less than a week from now until I get that video out. Right, thank you for joining me. Until next time, cheerio, bye-bye.